DOLIVE.
Well, good afternoon and welcome back to another fishing adventure. It's an absolutely glorious day here in Jersey. So sunny, so warm. But it's not really my particular favourite conditions to be out lure fishing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait till tonight. The sun goes down, darkness falls, and we get into those bass as they're creeping around in the shallows. Now recently I've been doing a lot of fishing at night. A lot of fishing in these shallow, rocky grounds where the bass tend to stick around or flow through. And that brings my attention to this particular video. And this video is about flow. In Jersey, we've got massive tides, albeit they fluctuate from small to big. But with a tide, it brings flow. And with flow, it brings water movement. With water movement, it brings particular lures to be using. Now, I've never really been a fan of kind of stick lures like the Albi Snacks, the Evo and things like that. But this year, one lure has particularly turned that around, got me thinking and got me using it. The lure that has really turned it on for me is this, the DOLIVE stick. Now, I had one of these lures floating around in my box for a long time. One of my friends was over fishing with me from the UK and he said, you need to use that. That thing will work. Since then, I've never looked back. Went and bought myself a packet. And there you have it. Fished on a 7-gram weedless jig head. Absolutely perfect for where I'm fishing. So, that brings me to this video. Stick baits and flow. Everything I'm going to say here, it's not gospel. It might be different to where you fish. But this is what has worked for me in the particular areas that I'm fishing. So let's talk about it. Flow and stick baits. Now, like I always say, everyone is different. Everyone has a spot that's totally different to where somebody else fishes. But this particular area right in front of me, as you can see, is littered with obstacles, rocks, weed. It's got a little bit of everything. Now picture this with 3 meters of water above it. Tide absolutely pissing through, either from left to right or from right to left, depending on where the tide is. These are the particular areas where I'm kind of choosing to fish for these bass using stick baits. Chucking the lure out and just letting it flow. Depending on the weight of the lure, if it's belly weighted or it could be unweighted, your lure could just be trickling along over all this kind of area. We've got a rock here that's no more than 2 foot off the deck, but when the tide runs up against it and flows off it, it's a perfect place for the ambush for bass just to sit and hold. We've got a much bigger rock here. Obviously the water can flow and come over this, as you can see. Loads of areas for the bass to sit and stalk and wait for bait to move out, whether if the tide's dropping or the tide's coming up. These are areas that I'm looking for. Obviously I'd come down and look to see where the tide moves. If this is a slack water kind of area, I won't be really choosing to fish it. I want a place where the water's going to move through nice and quickly over all of these kind of areas where the bass can sit and hide. Now you can see you've got another big rock just here in comparison to that one. Big gully in the middle of it. Perfect place for the bass to ambush and wait for their area. So this might be a little place which is close to home for you, which might be the same, but these are the kind of areas that I'm looking for. Areas like gullies with rocks in between, loads of weed which stand up tall when the tide's flowing in. Really good areas. Well, as you can probably see, the tide is absolutely hooning it at the moment. The tide's really starting to push in. Now when the tide's pushing out also, it flows just as quick. Albeit the tributaries that are filling up now, they might be actually flowing out in different kind of ways. That's just the way the water works and the way the tide actually moves. Now I've had most of my success with a DOLIVE on a slightly weighted 5-gram jig head with the built-in weedless hook, which looks like that. And the only reason I'm using the weighted and not unweighted is because where there's flow and kind of deep water, I say 1 to 3 meters, I want to make sure that my lure is getting down to the depths of those places that we were just looking at before, where there are bits of structure, and I want the lure to get down to them but be able to flow naturally within the water. Now when I come out at night at the moment, there's lots of pin sand eels around which are very small. Now that lure is a lot bigger than a sand eel that big. The sand eels are tending to do absolutely nothing. They just hang around. Unless you flash your head torch on them or you make a disturbance on the water, that's when they kind of go mental and they kind of spread out and start jumping out the water. So I want my lure to look as much like them as possible. So I am using a slightly weighted head, but if you don't want to use that, what you can do is go for a weightless hook, like so, with a small twist lock on the top. And that could fit on the front, twist lock in, and then that would just make sure that lure is totally weightless and it can just flow along the top of the water. Now I have had fish using the technique of weightless, but in these particular areas that I'm fishing, slightly weighted works for me. It means also that I can get a really good cast out to those areas and not miss those areas by having a short cast. Now this is a twist lock weedless hook. I'm going to use the Albi Snacks for example here. Now instead of using your conventional jig head which I super glue to the front, which fishes weedless like so, some of you might choose a weightless or a belly weighted hook, but the best way to do this is by using a twist lock. Now a twist lock is a coil with a point which inserts into your lure, and then you can fish it weedless. And the way to do this, if you haven't seen it before, is to push it in and just twist your lure nice and easy, and it then protrudes into the lure and then sits on it, making sure that it's attached like so. Obviously line it up to where you want it to be. You don't want your hook to be too small, you want it to be a nice size so you can get a good grip on the bass when you make a hook set, and then just bring it through like so. And that's how that sits, locked in on the front, no super glue needed, and then the hook sits nicely on the top of the lure. This means that you can cast it out and fish it, still keeping a little bit of action in the tail and just letting it flow like a sand eel does in the water, waiting for a bass to come and get it. And you could use this the same for a DOLIVE or any other lures that you're using, but as I say, it's preference to the angler, but it's always nice to know how to do it. Now other lures using the same kind of principle, the straight tail or the stick, are these wave worms. As you can see, this is fished on a weightless weedless hook. Again, could use a small weighted jig head with the kind of Texas hook, but that's another lure that I've had lots of fish on this year as well. Obviously a crowd favorite between a lot of anglers is the Evo. Again, just like the wave worm, straight stick. This one's actually got a more pointed tail. I've had loads of fish on that over the years, especially in the pink color. And then always the favorite of mine, this is the kind of lure that kind of brought me into the whole stick bait kind of atmosphere, was the Albi Snacks. And I find that this color, the black and silver sparkle, is really good on those nights where the moon's out and you know the fishing is kind of a bit tentative, the fish can be a bit finicky, they're in the area. That color really does bring them out. Also white. Now this really does go to show the key of coming to look at an area before you go and fish it. Before, when the tide was coming in, I was next to this massive rock which is submerged. Not this one, the one behind it. 6 foot high off the deck, big rock lump, and then a second rock lump behind it. Areas where the bass can sit and hold, areas where the bass can sit in ambush, areas where bait can flow in, flow over, and the bass just sit and wait for it. Perfect places for you to know where to cast your lure and let it just slowly come into those areas naturally, and bang. So that is the key on coming to check out places, especially where there's loads of flow, areas where there's pressure edges, where the water comes up against the rock and then flows over it, putting that slight disturbance behind the rock like that, as you can see in front of us and I can see over there. And it's really good to know these kind of areas, especially when you're fishing at night, of where you want to put your lure and where you're going to let it flow and how long for. Because it might be a case that you let it flow after you cast for 20 seconds and then you know there's nothing in behind it, so you might as well reel in. Now, as you can probably see behind me, that tide is seriously flowing. Does look good, doesn't it? But for me, it doesn't look too good. I don't really like fishing these conditions. Bright, sunny, beautiful weather. Now, I might sound a little bit snobbish because I know people in the UK that would dream for weather like this, but it's really just not my thing. I probably will catch fish if I had a cast, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back at night. Albeit, I don't really like to film at night. I don't really like to have my head torch on. I like to be as quiet as possible, silent, and then cast one of these and just let it flow through the depths. Let it flow through the water. Wait for that subtle tap. Rod tip high, just wait for that pluck. Or sometimes they just engulf it and motor off and that rod just starts to absolutely bend and hell breaks loose. So yeah, that is a little introduction to the lures that I like when it comes to stick bait fishing. So always just remember, when you are fishing with them, fish slow. Make sure you've got feel on the lure itself. Now it might be weedless, it might be weighted. It really depends on the person, the place and your preference. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm just showing you what works for me. I'll come back out tonight and see if we can get into some fish. Put the proof in the pudding. But until then, I recommend you have one of those in your box. Well, there's the first fish of the evening. I've not been here long. DOLIVE. I've cut this DOLIVE a little bit down because I was getting some bites just before it and they weren't taking it, so I cut one down, made it a little bit smaller, and this fish has just nabbed me straight away. Goes to show that they love that little pintail action in this really fast flowing water. But yeah, lovely little fish to start off the session, probably about 48, I can't complain, but the fish are here and that little DOLIVE stick is working, and all I'm doing is I'm just casting it out, just letting it flow, just making sure my rod tip's high, bouncing it over the boulders and that we were looking at before, and this thing just came up and absolutely hoovered it. Well, there you go, second nice fish of the evening. Absolutely smashed that DOLIVE. Water's getting quite shallow now, but fish have really just started to turn on. I missed a really solid fish just before, really solid. Hit me really hard, but can't go wrong with that. That's about 50 odd, 55, I don't know, but a really stunning fish. And again, just fished really slow, hardly moving the lure at all. And bang, there we go. Oh, there you go, third fish. Absolutely slammed me. Literally no movement to the lure at all. Fish slammed me. That was literally the cast after I put that one back. Bro, chill. They're fired up, these fish, and they're in some seriously shallow water. This is why this lure is fast becoming one of my favourites. Beautiful fish, so fat. He is packed to the brim. But yeah, just fishing that DOLIVE really slow and just letting it doing its thing, and I'm literally not moving it. I'm just keeping tension on the lure just to make sure that the fish is, or the lure is intact, and then absolutely bang. Well, I've had quite a few fish tonight, but I've started to pick up some better fish in the last 10 minutes. DOLIVE again. Beautiful fish that. Probably 55. DOLIVE. Not bad, man. That thing screamed off in the tide. Can't go wrong on that.